In the last video, I told you about Mid-Penn Bank, how we started and what we look like today. So let's talk about the rest of the banks in the country. So there are, at this point, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4,000 to 5,000 banks in the country. Some of them are public banks, some of them are private. And this doesn't include the banks that are foreign banks that operate within the United States. So you sometimes have heard about a two-tiered banking system, and that really describes banks that are national banks and banks that are state banks. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about the real tiers in the banking system. And let's start with the top part of that tier, which are the too big to fail or the systemically important financial institutions, or SIFIs, as they might be called. And those are generally those really big banks. They're, collectively there's 10 of them that operate in the country. Their total assets that they have are somewhere in the neighborhood of $14 trillion. And this is why Secretary Yellen calls them systemically important, because if something happened to one of those financial institutions, it could set off contagion throughout the entire financial network of the country and maybe even the world. And so these are the companies like JP Morgan, Chase, Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, etc. Below them are the large regional banks, and there are 20 to 100 of those. Collectively they're overseeing a few $1 trillion in assets. And these are the banks that you might recognize, like M&T Bank, for instance, which is a really good bank that's operated in the Northeast area, mostly. Then below them, the third tier, are the community banks. And we'll start with the large community bank population, which are banks from $3 billion to $10 billion. And that's where Mid-Penn Bank resides. And then the smaller community banks, which are anything below $3 billion. And then as a last full tier, there are the credit unions. And the credit unions, they're a completely different animal. They don't pay taxes. They're subsidized by the government. I think it's one of the biggest farces perpetrated on the taxpayer in the country, but we'll deal with that at some other point. So I do want to just describe those, the too big to fails, and those large regional banks, then the large community banks, the smaller community banks, and the credit unions, which again, we're not going to really deal with. All right, so as I said earlier, every bank is either chartered as a state bank or a national bank. So Mid-Penn Bank is a state chartered bank. We have the state of Pennsylvania through the Department of Banking and Securities as our primary regulator. And we also, as our federal regulator, because we're a non-member bank, we have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which we'll talk a little bit more about in another video. So those two entities, the state and the FDIC, for us, they do safety and soundness exams on us pretty much every year. And they alternate. One year it'll be the state, the next year it'll be the FDIC. And in those exams, what they're doing is they're assessing what they call a CAMELS rating. So it's capital adequacy, your asset quality, your management, your earnings, liquidity, and sensitivity to market risk. So they're collectively called the CAMELS rating. They come in and they look at all the things that they need to look at to evaluate each one of those areas, and they assign a rating from a 1, which is the best, to a 5, which is the worst. And then there's an overall composite rating. So they are coming in every year and determining whether you're a safe and sound financial institution. The unfortunate thing is they don't allow us to tell anyone about that. It's confidential between the regulators and us. And that's the same for any bank in the country. National banks, the ones that aren't chartered in a state, are regulated principally by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. So that's the regulatory structure throughout the country. And for us, because we have a bank holding company, we also do have as a third regulator the Federal Reserve from Philadelphia. And again, great folks to work with, been very helpful to us. So that's what the banking system looks like in the country and the regulatory oversight. So everyone's got regulators, Everyone is regulated on some type of periodic basis, either annually, perpetually throughout the year, the bigger they get, or the smaller institutions might be on a every other year or every 18 months. But those regulators, their job is to make sure that we're continuing to be a safe and sound organization. Again, unfortunately, that's not information we could share with the public. Thank you.